and welcome to Overtime Hockey Talk. My name is Mark Paul, my co-host Justin Baker, and I counting down the 19 days until the trade deadline. Although if you're listening to this, it's probably already 18. But it is right now February the 5th, and as of right now, no massive trades have happened yet. Haven't really heard. It's been quite quiet on the trade front, and this episode is, our goal is just to really fire up the GMs across the National Hockey League to get going on some trades. So we have a little more to talk about here. It's like that All-Star break has kind of lingered a little bit. I don't know if you feel that. Like the All-Star break happened, and it almost feels like
guys got to start back up again.
We haven't. Sometimes that All-Star break hits, and it's like, all right. Some certain teams, you just kind of see it. Like they're ready to go. They know that they have ground to make up, and they just come out of the All-Star break firing on all cylinders. Granted, we're not too far removed from the All-Star break to be able to see that, but it just feels like there's not a whole lot out there in the rumor sphere. I mean, there's players that are free agents. There's some things, I'm sure, a work underneath the surface, and we are here to dig out those rumors.
Yeah, I think the big thing is you look at, especially I like to reference TSN's trade bait list, right? There's not a ton of big name players on this list, and you can look at the free agent boards on like Cap Friendly or something like that, and there might be a few other names that pop up, but they're obviously not guys that maybe teams are looking to move because a lot of them are from playoff, contending teams.
Like Alex Pietrangelo isn't going to get traded.
Right.
Even if he's not signed, St. Louis is thinking they can win another Stanley Cup.
Exactly. Yeah.
And why wouldn't they?
Yeah, exactly.
And if the cost is Alex Pietrangelo leaving, which is most likely unlikely, I think you'd take that. You'd take that chance.
Right. Just like Columbus did last year. And so I think, I think a lot of teams are almost waiting. I want to say that most teams are probably going to wait till the end of this weekend before they go, okay, crap, this is where we are. We really need to make a decision, because if you look at the standings, especially like, for instance, in the East, when you've got Philly, Florida, Toronto, Carolina, they're all within just a couple wins of each other. So there's no point in pulling the trigger now until you can maybe see a little separation, whether or not you're going down or you're going up. Because, if you go and you spend a first, second round pick on a trade, and then the next thing you know, you're sitting, 4 wins out of a wild card spot.
Right.
It's pointless.
It's useless. Yeah, I mean, Toronto lost to the Panthers on Monday night, and they went from third in their division to outside the playoffs completely.
Right, crazy.
And I mean, just things are all over the place. I mean, the Carolina Hurricanes have like the 6th most wins in the Eastern Conference. They're like right up there with. I mean, Vancouver Canucks lead the Pacific Division with 30 wins. Carolina has 30 wins. They're not even on the outskirts of the play. Like, I mean, yes, they're on the outskirts, but like, there's a team ahead of them out of the playoffs.
Yeah,
and yet they have the same amount of teams as the team leading their division. It's crazy. Even St. Louis, they only have 2 wins fewer than St. Louis. It just so happens they've only lost 3 games in overtime instead of Boston's lost 12 games in overtime.
12.
Boston is, I mean, they're still 32-22 if you consider those losses. But they're really not much better than some other teams behind them. They have all those overtime losses or shootout losses, and it's definitely propelled them forward. They are actually 0-7 in the shootout. The Bruins.
Really?
Yes.
I don't even bother to really look at that stat anymore, but that's crazy to think about. And that's the excitement going into the trade deadline too, because this is exactly what Gary Bettman intended when he tried to create parity within the league. And the great thing is now you have, basically, I want to say 25, 24 franchises that honestly think they still have a shot. So fans keep watching, going to games.
Look at how far out Chicago was, and all of a sudden they're knocking on the door. They're 3 points out of the playoffs.
Yeah,
now.
Minnesota last night pulls off a win, right, against Chicago, right? Was it, I think? They won in overtime, Matt Dumba scoring, and, they may not be sellers now because they're right there on the cusp of knocking on the wild card door.
Yeah, 6 points out. I mean, 6 points is such a tough amount of points to make up.
It is, but as a GM, when you have to make, maybe say $10 million in playoff revenue to get out of the black, you're thinking, okay, crap, we're not selling because I want to freaking get in and make some money.
Yeah, it's almost like it's harder to claw back though, and a lot easier to just completely dump the bed. Like Winnipeg is just free falling right now. They're 2-7-1 in their last 10, and they find themselves 3 points out of the playoffs. They're nowhere to be found in the Central Division. They're now 7 points back of the Avalanche. Like it's almost like in that Central Division, you've got St. Louis, Dallas, Colorado, and then everyone else. Like they're 7 points up on the next team, which is Nashville. But it's crazy. The West is shaping up to be very interesting.
Especially that Pacific Division.
That Pacific. Yeah. Did anyone expect Vancouver and Edmonton to be atop that division?
I remember I picked them to be out of the playoffs.
Arizona. Arizona.
Well, I did pick Arizona to win Vegas to win the division, but Arizona to get in. So
yeah, I think we both had Arizona getting in.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, well, with that said, you have ranked the top 10 players available in free agency and their based on their cost. Right?
Yeah. And I mean, for instance, there's guys who are available in free agency, but what I think they'll cost and the value they'll bring to their, team that traded for them basically is how I figured they'd rank. So for instance, I'll just come out and say it, like Chris Kreider, right? He's number one on everybody's trade bait boards, but he didn't make my top 10 list because one, I don't think he'll get traded. And two, I think the cost he's going to, it's going to take to pull him out of New York and what I think he'll bring to the team back in return. And whether or not he hits, says buy in free agency, just lowered his value in my opinion. So.
Yeah. I mean, right now Kreider's playing in a top 6 role or really in a top line role, top
pretty much,
power play minutes. And I mean, he's got 35 points in 50 games. If he gets acquired by a top playoff team, let's just say Boston goes out and acquires Chris
They always
Kreider.
Want that kind of guy. Yeah.
He isn't going to play. He'll probably end up in the top 6, maybe. But he might be more like the top 9, and you get to shuffle guys around. But I don't think you get the same kind of production from him.
No, absolutely not. And what you have to give up to get him. So yeah, that's kind of where I rank these guys in terms of what they're going to bring back to the team that trades for him.
All right. Well, let's get things started.
All right. Well, number 10 for me, I've got Jumbo Joe going to Vegas.
Wow.
Yes, I know it's crazy, right? I think he stays in the Pacific Division, right? I don't think he wants to go all the way over to the East.
Did score his 1,500th point last night.
He did. Good on him. And even better, I want a nice little shout out to Alex Ovechkin, 2 away from 700 on that hat trick. He's making the scoring race very interesting for
40 goals
the Rocket Richards. So, but anyways, so Jumbo Joe to Vegas, and all it's going to cost Vegas, in my opinion, is maybe a conditional third rounder. And for 2020, when I say conditional, maybe like it bumps up to a second if they make it to the conference finals or win the cup or something, And so,
do you think that San Jose is willing to make a move with Vegas?
Absolutely.
There has been quite hatred between those two teams.
Understand it completely. I mean, you go back, 2 playoff series ago, and you can understand why they don't like each other. But I think in the case of Joe Thornton, they'll be willing to move him wherever he wants to go.
And you think he'd want to go to the Las Vegas Golden Knights?
He'd be willing to, absolutely. Because one, I think Vegas obviously has a need for centerman, right? They've got Paul Stastny centering the top line right now because Wild Bill Karlsson's out, but behind him, they've got, Christian Stevenson, Cody Eakin. So they have a need for, maybe another playmaker to come in there. Now, while I don't think, Joe's going to play 19 minutes a night anymore, but he could be ideal for their second power play unit, get some nice minutes in there. And he's got guys who score goals around him like Pacioretty and Stone. So he would be, nice little assist man for them. And I think, when I think about Joe Thornton, what he could possibly bring in terms of veteran leadership as well, I think it would be worth kicking the tires on maybe for a Vegas team that, could use a little success. And, he's got a familiar face there with Peter DeBoer going in there. So, would be interesting.
That is true. I think if he's going to move and be willing to go somewhere, Peter DeBoer would have to probably be the selling point. Like, hey, go play for a guy who respects you, will utilize you properly. That isn't a bad thought.
Yeah, and you have to. I mean, also too with these lists too, you have to take in consideration, cap crunches with a lot of these teams too, and so a lot of contenders don't have maybe the money. They have to move pieces around because they're right up against it. Whereas Vegas, let's face it, with Joe Thornton, probably anybody can find a way to wiggle in $2 million.
Sure. Yeah.
So, but I think he would fit in well for a team that wouldn't mind an upgrade at a center position, and I think he would be an upgrade considering maybe not outside of Paul Stastny, but everybody else he would be an upgrade for.
Yeah, I don't think Joe Thornton's going anywhere. I think he's going to stay in San Jose. He'll just play out the rest of the year, and then he'll wait to see what San Jose does in the offseason to determine whether or not he'll return there. My assumption is that he retires if they're going to be another dumpster fire type of team. Or the one other place I could see him going is if Toronto just replaces Jason Spezza with Joe Thornton. Like that fourth line center role in Toronto is going to be, I think, like over time as this team, obviously, like you're going to have Matthews and Tavares and Marner and Nylander there for a long time. Who's going to fill in those spots down below? It's going to be local guys who are from Toronto, from that area. They can go back. They can play in the twilight of their career. They don't have a lot of pressure on them, and they just get to go be that secondary piece. I could see that happening. I just don't know if I don't know if Thornton would be willing to go to Vegas. I really don't. I really don't.
I don't know. And again, I think
there's a lot of blood.
There's a little bit of bad blood there, but I always love taking like just teams out of left field making deals because like you hear, like every year I hear Boston's name thrown up with like the same, type of player, but then this guy ends up going somewhere else, right? You hear about like the 4 teams, a couple weeks ahead of time that are after this guy, and then he goes to a completely different other team, so I love just throwing the, darts at a board and seeing where it lands and see if these deals would fit. And, make sense.
He definitely would fit.
Yeah.
He definitely would fit. I just think he's always been boring in free agency, right back to the team.
Yeah. I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if he stays in San Jose.
I guess. Yeah, right. Okay, who's number 9?
All right, number 9 for me is a goaltender. We don't see a lot of those move, but I think this team could really use a backup come playoff time because for me, it's Ryan Miller going to Colorado.
Okay. All right.
I think this would probably only cost them a 3rd or 4th rounder, and not even necessarily for this year, but could be next year's 3rd or 4th rounder. So you wouldn't have to sacrifice anything big. And I think when you look at Colorado, right, Philip Grubauer, we know the history. He's played a couple playoff games, got the stinky boot. Holtby comes in and saves the day. So if you're Colorado going in there, you're thinking, we'd love to have a veteran guy who's been there, who's had experience in the playoffs, and we know Ryan Miller's got plenty of it. And he's putting up good numbers on a stanky team, just a terrible team. And I'm not a huge fan of Pavel Francouz. I don't know if he's, the ideal backup right now for this team.
He's put up pretty fantastic numbers.
I'm not hating the numbers.
Got a .924 save percentage. He's
not hating the numbers.
9 goals above replacement.
But again,
12-4.
Again, not hating the numbers. I just think come playoff time, if Grubauer craps the bed again, like he did in Washington, I think having a veteran guy who has plenty of playoff experience like Ryan Miller would be ideal. He's cheap, and I think he'd bring good value because, again, now you can rely on somebody else to go in there and maybe save the series if you got to play Dallas first round because that's going to be a goaltender's battle, right? When you got to go up against Bishop, now you got to win games 2-1. I don't know.
Yeah, okay. Do you now? I know. Okay, we'll continue on your list, and if players don't come up,
there's a bunch of players that won't come up for sure, but you can throw them out there. I want to talk.
Yeah, to me, like Colorado, probably not willing to give up anything for Miller when they know that they have a backup who can perform behind him. Like, there's just no point in giving up anything, even a 3rd round pick. I wouldn't give up a 3rd round pick for Miller when I know that I have a guy who's just as good in terms of numbers right now. Like Ryan Miller's a name. So
yeah,
I think that it kind of maybe puts like he's got to be better than this guy who, most of us haven't really watched play. He's 29 years old and this is really the first time that he's been productive. I just don't think Ryan Miller is the answer when you already have a reasonable backup. I don't discount though that Ryan Miller could and probably will be moved. I think right now, Frederik Andersen out for the Leafs, we don't know how long it'll be. I think that to me that is the most likely goaltending move Maybe you already have a goaltender in mind for the Leafs.
Up on number 7, yeah. We'll get to that, yeah.
All right. To me, that's probably out of any team in the league that needs a goalie that is in the playoffs or close to it. It would be them.
Beautiful.
All right, number 7.
Yeah, number 7
Or
for me.
8?
No, yeah, number 8.
Number
Sorry, I just said number 7. So number 8 for me is going to be Sami Vatanen going to the Carolina Hurricanes. And this is where
get richer in the defensive side.
Yeah. Well, this is going to cost Carolina a little bit. I'm saying it's going to cost them at least a first rounder and possibly an addition of a mid to late, pick, maybe a fourth rounder in 2021, fifth rounder, something like that.
What if you traded Jake Bean for Sami Vatanen, just straight up?
It's
New Jersey,
a possibility.
Would you be willing to do that?
I think that when you look at that, Hayden Fleury is going to need a new contract. He's a RFA. Trevor Van Riemsdyk's going to be gone, and I think Sami Vatanen, he's a right-handed shooter, which I think they would love to have right now, especially since Dougie Hamilton's pretty much done for the year. I think that would be the ideal choice for them. Jacob Bean, maybe. But I think, boy,
I just think you could do it. Like, Jake Bean would just be like, all right, we're going straight up.
I honestly don't hate it now that I really think about it. I don't think it would be such a bad move. I think it would be cheaper for Carolina to do because, let's face it, they've got a lot of talent on the back end, but I think they would rather have an established guy. So moving a guy like Bean wouldn't really hurt them short term. Maybe longer term, it might be, not the greatest thing, but
yeah, he hasn't been able to really find his way up to the National Hockey League. He's only 21 though.
Yeah, still young.
I wonder if you're Carolina though, you're looking at it. I guess you have to decide: is Carolina like, why are you making that move? Because right now they're a win outside the playoffs. I think that they probably should be a playoff team. We're starting to see, how things are shaking out in that Metro, and it looks like the 3 teams that are up there right now are going to be up there. Like, it's Washington, Pittsburgh, Columbus, New York, and then there's going to be one other team who's vying for that spot, and that maybe Philadelphia, Carolina, and then Toronto and Florida. You've got 4 teams probably battling for one playoff spot, maybe 2 if you consider you've got the 3rd spot in the Atlantic, but.
Yeah, and I know Carolina really wants to replace somebody on the back end for Dougie Hamilton. And I think
that would and it would make sense.
And I think maybe, honestly, when you hear teams like Pittsburgh, Florida right now, they're looking for somebody else to play alongside, Aaron Ekblad. They just can't seem to find anybody who can just fit in there. So they're looking for a defenseman. And I think Carolina, if they strike quick and strike hot, they can get their season back on track because, Mrazek's looking, average right now. And, I think maybe getting another really good puck-moving defenseman, a guy who's a right-handed shot, would be great for Carolina and might put him over the top.
All right, I don't hate it. All right, and New Jersey would definitely. They don't care who they trade with right now.
Yeah, because he's walking after the season anyway. So yeah.
Do you think he's gone after the season?
Oh yeah. Vatanen will leave. He's a UFA. There's no reason to stick around in Jersey unless they offer him just a ridiculous amount of money.
They might. They don't have anybody else on the back end.
They really don't.
They might be willing to give him 6 to stay.
I think he'll get 6 even if he hits the open market because he's a righty.
Yeah, he's been in New Jersey a couple years now, 3 years.
Look, Tyler Myers got a $5+ million, and I'd take Vatanen over Tyler Myers any day.
Working out for Tyler Myers in Vancouver right now, man. Okay, let's go to your number 7. I assume it's a goaltender.
Yeah, we talked goaltender. This one to me is probably one of my favorite trades because I really like this guy as a backup, and that's Jack Campbell going to Toronto.
Jack Campbell. Okay.
Yes, a guy who has another
year left on his deal, I believe.
He's got another year after this season at 1.6, so not a ton of money, right? And I think it's more than he's. Oh, I'm sorry, 2 seasons after this.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. He signed an extension. Yeah.
He did. So, but again, I think this is. When you have an organization like LA that's at the bottom, they're looking to sell off assets where they can, right? And we've heard Jonathan Quick's name pop up, during the course of the year. But LA's got a really good prospect goaltender, by the name of Cal Peterson, who's supposed to be like the next big thing. And I believe he will be. However, I think right now you can't I think it would be best maybe if you get him in some time, splitting games, maybe Not necessarily this season, or
because he
maybe
is
not even next.
25.
Yeah,
He's not like a 20-year-old prospect coming up. At this point, it's
you got to get him in there.
you got because you've got 3 years left with this guy before you decide whether or not he's gone or not.
Right. And
Same with himself.
Yeah, and you don't want to have a 3-headed monster like New York. At least I don't think LA wants to go that route. So to me, I think Jack Campbell, who has shown he can put up decent numbers on a really crappy LA team, going to Toronto, I think all this might cost. Toronto is maybe a 2021 third rounder, maybe a late draft pick for this year.
But if you're LA, why would you trade your starting goaltender for a third round pick?
Well, they've got Quick, right? He's their starting goaltender, and they've got to make room for Cal Peterson to come in. So, out of those three guys, who are you going to trade, and who's more likely to be traded? And that's Jack Campbell, because most teams can fit in his cap hit at 1.6, and I think if, like I said, if Toronto sends back those couple draft picks and sends Hutchinson back with them, they can find the room to squeeze him in there.
Well, I don't know if LA would be willing to trade Campbell for peanuts.
Well, then maybe you throw in a prospect in there.
I'm thinking that, to me, the guy who is on Toronto, who is expendable, is Kapanen.
No, I would trade Johansson or Johnson first.
I don't know. I like. Yes, he is. He's paid a little bit more. He's signed for a little bit more term. He's a little bit older.
Yeah.
Johansson can score goals. Kapanen has not really proven that he is. He's probably not a guy who's going to score 20 for you consistently. I mean, he scored 20 last year, and this year he's got 10. Johnson's been hurt much of the year, and just kind of coming back. He is a guy who scored 20 goals twice now. No, sorry.
Once for the Marlies, but
yeah. I think he's more of a pure goal scorer, though, than Kapanen is. Kapanen showed he can't play up in the lineup. Like when he's been put on the lineup with Matthews, he looks lost. When he's put on that third line, he looks real good. And now, could he move into the top 6 for some other teams? Probably. The problem with Toronto is they don't really have a second line. They have 2 first lines. So, I mean, it's either you're playing with Matthews and Nylander, or Matthews and Marner, or Tavares and Nylander, so I think, and also the fact that he plays on the left side where Marner and Nylander both play on the right. I think that's why you keep Johnsson around. He can score. He's proven that, and he can play on the left side. Whereas Kapanen, he's kind of entered these different dry spells, and I guess when all is said and done, I'd like to keep both of them, but they're both paid around the same, 3.4, 3.2 million.
Yep.
And when you look at their cap situation, they're probably the guys. One of them probably isn't going to fit long term, based on everything else that you've got. So he wouldn't be a bad guy to move. But if you're going to move Kapanen, it's probably not going to be for a 28-year-old goaltender.
No, absolutely not. No, that's why I say the picks have to come into play, from next year. But
also the Leafs don't have a lot of picks.
No, and that's why I say, for instance, the third round pick next year, you dish that, right? And then maybe they've got a lot of late round picks this season, so maybe you dish one of those, like a 6th round pick, because you've got plenty of those, and those are hit or misses in terms of NHL players. So
yeah, it'll be. Now it's all going to depend on how long Frederik Andersen's out.
Absolutely,
and that would to me that changes who I'd want to bring in. Like, obviously, everybody's talking about maybe Georgiev is a little higher up on your list.
Oh, his price would be a lot more for sure.
Well, it'd be Kapanen.
Yeah. Oh,
that's
for sure.
You got to give up a roster player, probably somebody who you could, like. Kapanen's 23 years old. He's locked in for 3 years. He's a decent price. The problem with bringing in Georgiev is that he's an RFA at the end of the year. So what's he going to want? He's probably going to want pretty similar money to what Kapanen's making. He's probably going to want $3 million for a couple years on like a prove it contract.
Especially if he comes in and then quote unquote saves your season.
Well, then he's another backup too. Like, is he going to want to say, no, I deserve 4.5. Like, I've proven I can be a starter now. Yeah.
And then you got to convince Freddie Andersen, like, hey, are you cool doing like the 40 and 40? Like a lot of these.
Well, you're not going to pay both guys like that.
No, not at all.
They can't afford to. The Leafs can only afford to pay one goalie, and the other goalie's going to need to make Jack Campbell money. So, I mean, you're, the thinking isn't wrong. Jack Campbell may be a good fit.
Yeah, and
at
I'll
least
be
in terms of salary.
Yeah, upfront and honest, spoiler alert, Gorgiev not getting moved, in my opinion.
So they'll wait till the offseason.
Yes, I do. Absolutely.
And they really have no reason to deal him unless they get a first-round pick. I would deal him for a first-round pick.
Absolutely.
Hands down.
And no one's going to do that.
Probably not.
Because the teams that have first-round picks to boot probably don't want to deal.
No.
Not yet.
They don't want to deal a first-round pick for a backup goaltender.
Right. And then the other problem is, too, is, I think first-round picks are going to be harder to swindle from teams because, one, everybody's so close in those wild card spots right now. You go on it, you deal that first rounder pick, and now you lose a couple, boom, you're out of it, and now it's a lottery pick. You're screwed.
Very true.
So
and you could protect it, but
you could absolutely. So
okay, let's go to number 6.
Staying in LA, Tyler Toffoli getting moved with a 5th-round pick, in my opinion, to Pittsburgh for a 2021 first rounder.
The Kings and the Penguins have made moves before.
They have, yeah. For another guy by the name of Tanner Pearson, who is doing pretty good in Vancouver, actually, but
didn't remain in Pittsburgh. But
I think, okay, so we know Jake Gensel's done for the year, and so Pittsburgh's looking for scoring, right? They need it, and I don't think they're going to, right now I know their top trade target, they've been eyeing, what's-his-face, Zucker out of Minnesota. But to be quite honest, I think with terms still on his deal, I think Minnesota's best bet is to wait until the offseason when, cap opens up a little bit more for some of these teams, and then they can pry a little bit more out of teams. Maybe get that first rounder that they really want, and maybe a nice little prospect to go along with it. But with Pittsburgh, I think because they're going to swing and miss with a guy like Zucker, in my opinion, the next best scorer available is Tyler Toffoli. And so I think that's why he's going to cost a first rounder, albeit maybe next year's, because Pittsburgh, doesn't have a second. So I don't think they're going to give up a first rounder for this season unless they feel like this is it. We're going all in.
I mean, yeah, if you're Pittsburgh at the same time, this really is. How many more of these
the window's closing.
Do you have?
Yeah.
Where you're like, they have been riddled with injuries, and yet they are very secure in terms of being in the playoff. They're Carolina's 8 points behind them. So it would be very unlikely that they miss the playoffs, especially the way they've been going right now. It doesn't look like they'll catch Washington, but they're not. Honestly, they're 2 games in hand. You win both those games, they're 2 points back of first place in that division.
It's crazy to think about.
But I just don't see Washington to go look in the rearview mirror and go, okay, time to turn it on again.
Right, we've been rope-a-doping.
I don't think Washington wants to play. They definitely don't want to play Pittsburgh in the first round.
Oh, goodness, no. Yeah, and I will say Pittsburgh does have a nice little trade chip, UFA coming up, who does make my list a little later by the name of Alex Galchenyuk.
Yeah, hasn't really been a great fit in Pittsburgh, but kind of one of those names.
Right.
Like, someone's going to think that maybe they can turn him into something, but man, the guy is just, it's like he somehow got worse.
I don't know how.
17 points in 43 games for Galchenyuk, and had every opportunity to be their third line center, to be on the wing with Malkin, be on the wing with Crosby. There was so many injuries that he had every chance to go up and grab that mantle, and he just never has. So, I agree. Pittsburgh, definitely, they'll make a move. Jim Rutherford, he's not going to sit back and just let this team go into the playoffs the way that they are, even though they're playing really well. He, I'm sure, is not afraid to make a move.
Yeah.
He's shown that before. Not to mention the fact that he's an older guy. We don't know how much longer Rutherford is going to manage this team. So I think you just got to kind of go all in. At this point, let's say the Penguins make the playoffs and they lose in round 1. Rutherford is probably looking at if you do this again, you're fired. Or they may just go another direction outright anyways. I know they won the Cup. It's crazy to think that. They won the Cup 2 years in a row, and it was only two seasons ago that they last won the Cup. Well, three Cups ago that they last won the Cup. But, you look at it and you go, all right, we haven't even gotten out of the first round but one season. They got out. The year after they won the Cup, they got out of the first round. They lost to Washington.
Yep.
And then the following year,
they get swept by the Islanders.
They get swept. And if they go into the first round again and they lose again,
Yeesh.
Is Rutherford? Is somebody going to go? Look, we don't have much longer with Sidney Crosby. Let's get somebody new in here to like kind of hit the reset.
When you
button.
fire
I don't
the
know.
coach and save another season for your employment, but
Yeah, you're not wrong. Mike Sullivan, boy, he would be nabbed up in a hurry.
oh, absolutely.
Okay, who's your number 5?
Number 5
the
for
top
me.
5.
We're in the top 5. So, my hometown team, the Detroit Red Wings, dealing Andre Athanasiou and Trevor Daley to Edmonton, and in return they get Jesse Puljujarvi and a 3rd-round pick.
Wow.
Yes.
Okay. Athanasiou or Puljujarvi. Okay, I'll say this. On the one hand, you are a Detroit Red Wings fan, so the deal in my mind is a little bit lopsided in the direction of Detroit
You think so?
getting much more potential.
I
we
will
know
agree.
what
There's more
Athanasiou is.
potential, but I think the trade value is low right now for a guy like Puljujarvi, who is totally comfortable being the leading scorer in Sweden and just hanging out.
But people tried to pry him at the beginning of the year, and
They
Ken
did.
Holland said, "It's fine.
But
I don't need
Steve Yzerman,
need to take those."
and
They are friends.
Yeah, they're the old assistant GM to Kenny Holland
and his
Stevie's-
old team.
Yep, and Stevie's shown he can. Frick, look what he did. He flipped. De La Rose for Robbie Fabry, and he can do that. So, and I was reading a thing from the Oilers beat writer Jim Matheson, who not necessarily an insider, but he did state that trading for Puljujarvi's rights would be a great move for Detroit because one, Athanasiou just hasn't really panned out, right? He's he's been tried at center, he's been tried on the wing, and I just don't think there's enough talent outside of Detroit's big three of Bertuzzi, Mantha, and Larkin to really help him out to succeed. So I think going to a team like Edmonton would be a great fit because one, Ryan Nugent-Hopkins would be great to have him on his wings. I think that would give them a little bit more depth in terms of where they can shuffle him in his top 9, and he still has people to play with. But then two, it gives you options if you're Edmonton because now you might consider splitting up Draisaitl and McDavid a little bit. And now you've got a guy who can skate really, really well.
I don't think they're going to do that.
But no, I don't.
It's the only reason why they are where they are. And I don't think Athanasiou. But I'll agree with you. Athanasiou is, of course, he's a guy that they could put in their top 9. Easy. Yeah. He is a wow.
He can go up and down the lineup, and I think he's capable of having potential to skate with these guys, right? Obviously Zach Cassian's been for some reason the only winger that seems to work with McDavid outside of Draisaitl, and so.
But he's signed for a good minute now.
Yeah, he's got I think 4 years for like $3-ish million or something like that.
Yeah, good on him.
Yeah, good on him. But I think from a Detroit standpoint, right, it's obviously not working out with Athanasiou, and I think he's an RFA, and I think that's why it might cost a guy like Puljujarvi. And let's face it, Edmonton could always use a little bit of help on the back end. And so Trevor Daley would be a nice veteran guy to go in there, maybe take some minutes from the younger guys like Ethan Bear, who maybe aren't, ready for the playoffs.
Yeah, I definitely don't hate the idea of Daley to the Oilers. So he would be a decent fit there, I think. Could play in your bottom pairing, but also could move up into the top 4 if you really needed him to. And I don't think there'd be a danger in Athanasiou like being an issue re-signing him. You're not going to bring back Sam Gagner probably, and he's paid $3 million. Athanasiou isn't going to get much more than that, unless if he comes into Edmonton and were to tear it up, and he might be able to get 3.5, 3.8 or something like that if he signed a long-term deal. But
if he goes on fire,
he's a less than $4 million player, and that just is who he is. He also leads the league in
plus minus.
He leads it in the bad way, minus 38 right now.
Terrible.
Not that stat is super telling. Really, all it tells us is that his team's really bad, which it is, and so is And the amazing thing is, like Filppula, he's next, minus 37. Yet Athanasiou only played in 37 games. He's more than a -1 per game.
He's had some bad luck.
Yeah, yes, and that of course is part of it. But he doesn't look as dynamic as he once did, and that could just be
change of scenery.
The
honestly,
team is better, but he's so fast, and you got to. Yeah, he maybe he could fit in with Maybe not necessarily McDavid and Draisaitl on that top line, but can he drop down and play with Nugent Hopkins and
James Neal,
create a dynamic second line?
Yeah.
That'd be solid for them. Okay, let's go to your number 4.
Yeah, number 4, J.G. Pageau from the Ottawa Senators. A guy who's probably going to be the top center, in my opinion, maybe moved at the deadline. He's going to go to New York, who I think could really use a third-line center. Now, he's playing first-line center minutes in Ottawa, right? But honestly, I think because of J.G. Pageau's two-way game, his ability to win draws, kill penalties, and still score some goals, right? I think he's on pace for between like 25 and 30 goals this season. So I think given all that...
Yeah, he's already got 20.
Yeah, it's going to cost Ottawa it's going to cost the New York Islanders probably a second and third rounder to get it done. But I think, honestly, they're like the lowest scoring team in the playoffs right now. And they could really use some goal scoring.
I can't see Ottawa giving him up for less than a first-round pick.
You don't think so?
Honestly. A 20-goal scorer at the 50-game mark. He's basically on pace to score 30. No, like, without much effort. Over the next 32 games, my assumption is that he's going to get another 10 goals.
I think...
So he's a 30-goal scorer, and you're going to trade him for a second and a third-round pick?
See, I think... Here's my thought process behind that, because I think, Ottawa wants to get a first-round pick, and he... maybe could garner it, but again, he's going to go play a third line role somewhere. He's not getting it. It's going to be rare if you're going to go to a team maybe outside of Winnipeg where you could come in and play, top 6 minutes. But
yeah, Winnipeg's not going to give up anything this season. They're
Exactly.
looking at this year and probably thinking like, well, if we don't make the playoffs, it's fine. But they're not going to make any big moves,
Right, exactly.
Now, especially trying to terminate Byfuglien's contract. Like they're more. It's next year. Like this year is kind of one of those like fluke years. Their plan, I'm sure, is to be back next year.
Absolutely.
If they make the playoffs, great.
Yeah. And so, again, I think because you're only going to get a third-line center out of this guy. Now, in New York, he could probably come up and play second-line minutes. He could play third-line minutes. You don't know. But they need guys that can score. And I think even though Ottawa wants a first-round pick for him, I think because there's so many teams that, lose a couple of games, they're out of the playoffs, they're not going to give up those first-rounders. And I think for a guy who could potentially walk at the end of the year, I think eventually Ottawa's going to cave in and say, okay, crap, we'll just take the second and third rounder. Here you go. My opinion.
All right. The Islanders would definitely be a good fit. I think a first round pick is what it's going to take because I think that there'll be other teams willing to go all in for a guy like J.G. Pageau.
I will say there are going to be quite a few teams that will try to go after him.
Last time he made the playoffs too, Pageau basically made a name for himself. That's kind of what, that was his coming out party was the 2016 playoffs and where they lost to Pittsburgh in Game 7 and he was just unbelievable through the first 3 rounds. And, I'm looking at different teams across the league that could use a guy who could show, not only can he play center, he can play the wing. So you can have him play the wing on 5-on-5, and then you can have him kill penalties. You can have him take him face-offs on a penalty kill. I mean, the Florida Panthers, they're a team that could afford to give up their first-round pick. They've made a lot of good picks. I mean, Owen Tippett is just ripping it up right now. They've done well drafting to where I think they could sacrifice a first-round pick for a guy like Pageau, who might come to Florida and go, damn, I want to play here.
I mean,
this is awesome.
It's not a bad spot to land, I'll tell you that right now.
They've got the cap space to bring him in. I mean, he could be a good replacement for Mike Hoffman if Hoffman decides to leave at the end of this year. And now maybe some of that depends on, I don't know what the relationship is with Hoffman. I know a lot of guys were a little bit estranged with Hoffman when he left Ottawa because of the Erik Karlsson stuff, but I feel like it's at least far enough removed, and Pageau wasn't really a centerpiece on that team, so I don't know how important that is. I just think there's so many other teams that may be willing to give up more than just a couple picks. No, not that a second and a third round pick are insignificant.
No, absolutely not. But
maybe if you were trading for a guy who is a pure, he's going to play my third line center, and he is a third line center.
Like a Nick Bonino?
Yeah, give a second and a third round pick, or just a second. But Pageau has proven that he can get it done. Now, he isn't a first line center. He's playing a first line.
Sure.
He's playing a first line role. But I think he's proven that he'll put up numbers wherever he is in your lineup. And if you can get him next to somebody with some serious talent, not that he's playing alongside Brady Tkachuk sometimes, but you get him consistently going with a team that not only do they have some talent up top, but they have depth throughout their lineup, so they're not getting focused on so heavily. I think that he could be very effective. But yeah, okay. Well, let's move to number 3.
Yeah, number 3 is my favorite defenseman that's going to get moved here at the deadline. That's Brendan Dillon. And you know what? There are a lot of teams that are going to want his services. I mean, we've talked about him. Pittsburgh, Florida. I think there's going to be a ton of teams that are going to be bidding for him. But
apparently
I think
Boston has inquired about him, and Toronto has acquired.
Absolutely. And I don't see why not. But I do think the one team, in my opinion, that could use his services probably more than any of those other teams, and that might be willing to give up said first rounder if they get back into the picture, maybe win a few games, and that's the Winnipeg Jets for me.
That is true.
Yeah.
Yes, the Jets desperately need a defenseman.
And I say, part of their package, I think what it's going to cost them to get him, you might have to give up that first rounder, but I think there's going to be a lot of conditions in what they give up.
Whether you re-sign him.
Yes, absolutely. Because, if Bufflin's contract gets terminated, they're going to have cap space next year. They've got Kulikov coming off the books. So now they've got a ton of money where they could give this guy, he's only making $3 million now. Now maybe next year you give him a 4-year deal at $5 million each, per season.
Yeah, but do you really want to pay a guy who's he's never had more than 22 points in a season.
No, and he's not a big point producer and never will be.
He's not a big point producer. He's always played in the,
he's been a middling defenseman.
Third pairing, sometimes
number 4, number
pairing.
5 guy. But he's solid defensively. I love his game. And again, I wouldn't give him a ton of term, but again, I think as a rental, he's going to cost somebody a lot of money or a lot of picks, per se. So we'll see how that pans out for him. I like his game, but I think maybe when it comes to re-signing him, you just got to be a little careful how much money in term you give this guy.
Yeah, I mean, you look at his fancy stats, and he's
fancy stats.
He is having his worst year in terms of a Corsi possession wise.
So is everybody else in San Jose.
Right. And he still is a 51-3 on Fenwick, and his PDO is 97.4. So it's not like crazy things are happening for him on the ice. He's mostly 50-50 in terms of his offensive and defensive zone starts. Yeah, I mean, he's a guy that you'd be willing to bring in, but to overpay for him would be foolish in my mind. In my mind, Brendan Dillon is what he is. He's a $3.5 million guy. Maybe on the open market he gets $4, but I don't know. Maybe if you sign him to a 2-year deal, you might be able to, I guess, justify overpaying a little bit. But Brendan Dillon, I think, just is kind of he's not exactly pushing the needle in your direction. It's clear, yes, he has okay fancy stats, but who's on the ice with him the majority of the time?
Brent Birds or Erik Karlsson.
So yeah. It definitely is helping him. And sure, he can now. Maybe there's a fit for Ekblad in Florida. Ekblad's he shoots right, Dillon shoots left. You can bring him into Florida and put him alongside. He's proven he can play alongside other very talented defensemen, and he can kind of be that guy who he's not going to leave his zone.
Right.
He's staying behind. So maybe you can find a partner for Ekblad.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think he would be a great fit in Florida too, for sure. And I think Florida's at the point because you've got Dadonov and Hoffman, coming off the books this season. Who knows if they're going to resign either one of those.
I think they're going to make a move.
So yeah, you could go all in and maybe, spend a little bit more.
Problem is they don't really have any cap space at all.
No. But you could send something back, and maybe Florida gets a little.
You would send back probably Mark Pysyk, Pysyk had a great night. I think he had a hat trick the other night. It'd be hard to send him away, but yeah, I mean, as far as defensemen go, you're kind of locked in here with Ekblad, Yandel, Strawman, and Matheson all getting basically around $5 or $6 million apiece, give or take. But yeah, it's not like you're trading You're not gonna deal any of your UFAs. So to find that money is.
I think Florida's got enough money in terms of deadline space. I think what they've got.
They have their deadline space 141,000.
That's it, really? Oh my gosh! Never mind.
So that's what I'm saying is that they're gonna have to deal someone, or like, okay, San Jose eats half of Dylan's contract, which would put him at 1.9 million.
Right.
But even then, you still gotta dump somebody, a Frank Vetrano or something like that, just to get back under the cap in order to make a move. So that would be, I guess, Florida's tough point is that unless they were to go and deal Mike Hoffman for another player who wanted to sign there or something, that
maybe we finally get a 3-way trade, a 3-team trade. I mean,
or you just be sneaky and you just like. San Jose, just make that 3-way trade that you don't know.
with Vegas when they took some cap space and
Pittsburgh and that was Pittsburgh. Okay, let's go to number 2.
Number 2, all right. Speaking of Pittsburgh, Alex Galchenyuk, who I think can provide a lot of value at a very low cost, and so I think this scenario to me would be super fun to happen. But I honestly don't think it's going to happen.
Back to Arizona?
No, yeah, right, yeah, for Taylor Hall, right? What if Tampa Bay?
Okay, Tampa Bay.
I know Alex Galchenyuk has a little bit of money on his cap hit, but I think in terms of deadline space, Tampa's got the room to do it. And I think honestly, it's a low cost, high reward situation because one, you're going to surround him with a lot of talented guys, right? He could slot in very nice on a second, third line player, wing or center, because they've got plenty of those on both sides. And then you can throw him on the second power play unit. He can eat up, minimal minutes for that kind of, cost that it's going to take. And I think, maybe mid to late round picks, maybe a couple of them, maybe a 5th and a 7th.
If you're Pittsburgh, why in God's name would you do that?
Because he's walking. He's leaving. He's playing on your 4th line right now in Pittsburgh. He's doing nothing for you. At this point, it's better to get something in return. Maybe you get a 4th line. Yeah, and especially considering, they want to add, up front in terms of their top 6. So now you've got to move cap space out.
If you're Tampa Bay, are you willing to give up any roster player? Anthony Cirelli?
Yeah, maybe. Maybe you throw him up there. But, again, I think Patrick Maroon, who's playing wing on the 3rd line right now, is better suited on a 4th line role. So now you can throw Galchenyuk in his spot, and that'd be fantastic. I think it would work out great for Tampa Bay. I mean, the rich get richer, in my opinion. But
all right, now let me propose a similar deal to what you had spoken about before.
Okay.
This time involving the Detroit Red Wings. What if the Red Wings were to acquire Galchenyuk, sign him to a deal? Like all this is predicated on, hey, come here, sign a deal, and we will. Well, not a sign and trade, but just agree to an extension. As a part of the deal.
Okay.
So he signs an extension to stay in Detroit. You just sign like a 2-year extension at like $3 million. They say you're gonna have every opportunity to play on the top line. Like you're gonna for sure be in our top 6. You can be a part of the solution. There's no pressure here. We're not trying to win the Stanley Cup next year. Come in and be a part of our solution. And in return, they send Athanasiou to Pittsburgh.
That's a little bit tougher in my opinion because I think you can't do I promise to sign kind of, extension.
Yeah, you can. Guy signs an extension before he gets moved. Yeah.
No, yeah, you do a sign and trade.
Well, no, yeah, he just agrees to the extension. Like my what's his name? Oh gosh, Mark Stone basically did that. He sat down with Vegas and said, "Yes, I'll sign an extension."
Okay,
they didn't technically sign it until he was traded, and it was actually about like
it's a verbal agreement
after. But he said, "I'm willing to sign.
Okay,
I want to sign here. Yes, let's do it." Like you need to have something ready to go.
I got you now. Okay, my only disagreement with that is I think he's going to get some decent money on the free agent market, not a ton. But I think that opportunity for him to go out.
You think Galchenyuk is going to get decent money?
No, I think he's still going to get what Detroit would have maybe given him, that $3.5-4 million-ish in that range.
Yeah.
And I think he'll probably get that on the open market because he's still young.
I think that you think about it, he was in Montreal.
Yeah.
He faltered in Montreal. So
he was still a 40, 50-point guy, though.
And then they go, all right, you need to change the scenery. We understand. Send him to Arizona. Things clearly didn't work out in Arizona, but the team wasn't great. System wasn't maybe fitting to him.
Right.
Let's send him to Pittsburgh. He can play with a great player, or he can be a third line guy behind those guys. He's sheltered. He gets sheltered minutes, and he completely drops the ball. He can't play in their system at all.
Oh no, he is a guy who needs some talent around him.
There's not too many fourth chances at a high dollar level. Like, some team may be willing, any team's going to sign Galchenyuk to a 1-year, $1.8 million deal and give him the opportunity.
Well, I think he's going to be a 2-year deal at the max, but I think that opportunity to go pick the team you want, maybe he takes less money, takes $2.5 million to go play for a contender, right? Or a team like maybe Winnipeg who can still give him some decent minutes and they have a shot at a cup.
Okay.
So,
all right, and on to number one.
Yeah, number one. It's a doozy, and I think so. We've talked about Anaheim a little bit in terms of on previous shows where they're willing to eat a little bit of cap money per se to make a big move, because let's face it,
they have come out and said that.
Yeah, they've come out and said it. So I think you're going to see Andre Kasha maybe with a mid-round fourth, maybe like a fourth-round pick, go to a team called the Boston Bruins. And I think in return, Boston's going to send a first-round pick for this year, maybe a second or third-round pick for next year, David Backes, and then they're going to need a prospect in there too. And I think maybe a defenseman like Jakub Zaboril or what's his face? Because I think it's going to cost them a little bit to get Backes' $6 million off the books, and I think in return they get a guy, Andre Kasha, who's a right-handed shot, who they really need for their second line, and he's a good two-way player. So now you've got a guy who fits in well in a system like, Boston that expects you to back check and play good defense, but yet he's a righty, he can shoot, he can play top 6 minutes.
Yeah, and then at the end of his deal, he's still an RFA.
Exactly.
Still got one year left of RFA money, and then you UFA.
Yeah, so if you're Anaheim, now you get a really good defensive prospect out of it, right, with a Zaboril.
And a first-round pick.
And so now you've got some building blocks to go along with, Cam Fowler, Hampus Lindholm, or however long you decide this rebuild's going to take.
Yeah, and Boston loses that $6 million anchor of David Backes in the minors.
And I think the value is a no-brainer for me if you're Boston, but because they've always been trying to get another winger to play top 6 minutes with David Krejci, and now you can move a guy like Charlie Coyle around a little bit. You can put him on the third line, you can put him on the second line, wherever you want.
Yeah, probably lets you more easily bring back Torrey Krug at a high dollar amount.
Exactly, and that's the other thing. Now that $6 million is off the books, and you can sign Torrey Krug.
Yeah, Boston's going to look real interesting here, and at the end of next year when they lose Krejci, and you're looking at like extending Patrice Bergeron, perhaps. And they'll no longer have Chara.
Probably not in 2 years. Yeah.
Well, he's not making any money, so it doesn't really matter. Rask will be a free agent. Boston's about to look real different.
Yeah, that'll be interesting.
This is probably their year to win the cup. Like, if there's any team that should Columbus it and like all the chips to the middle, it's probably Boston.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at it too, they keep going at this pace. They don't have to face Tampa Bay or Toronto first round, so they can maybe skate away playing a team like Philly, New York, Carolina, who you can probably run right through.
Well,
I mean, honestly,
if Toronto ends up in a wild card spot.
My God, that would be hilarious.
No matter what they do, they just can't help but play each other.
That would be hilarious. I would love to see that series again. So if you're Boston, why not? Yeah, like you said, pull a Columbus. Go all in at this point, because I think your path to the cup is a little bit easier this year. I would think.
Yeah, probably.
So do it.
All right. Well, there are the top 10 trades. I will say there's probably a couple guys that I would at least consider.
I know we didn't talk about Chicago, right? They've got their goaltending situation
but right now they're rolling so well.
Yeah,
you got to think that they have a shot. Like, they have to be thinking, we could do something here. And hey, if there's a team who might be willing to work something, it's probably the Chicago Blackhawks. Now, maybe it takes one of those goaltenders, it takes moving one of them in order to open up enough cap space to be able to do anything. But at the same time, their deadline cap space, they've got $13 million of it available because of the long-term injuries to Seabrook and to Calvin DeHaan. So they definitely could be a surprise team. However, there's no way they're giving up a first-round pick. Not a chance. Not like, no. I'm sure they'd love to make the playoffs, but they also aren't foolhardy to know that, well,
You
yeah,
gotta think long term.
We're going to face St. Louis in the first round, and we're probably going to get our ass handed to us. It just is what it is. But to make the playoffs, I think would be an important step for this team to go, all right, some of the moves that we've made have worked, like Dylan Strome and Kirby Doc and who am I thinking? Adam Boqvist. That our first round picks, these guys who we've spent time developing, are actually coming into their own and reshaping our team. And so it would be a big thing if they could get into the playoffs, win a couple games. It could be a big boost to confidence of their team.
Yeah, and Nashville too. There's another team that's got a lot of pieces. Michael Granlund's a UFA after this season. He's had a couple 60-point seasons in Minnesota. Mm-hmm. Who else they got? Rocco Grimaldi. He's put up 26 points in 50 games, so not too bad. He's a nice little bottom six piece if you want that. They've got Kyler Turris that might need to move. They've got some pieces they could tool around with, especially if they lose a couple more games here.
Yeah. I think a couple other guys that could see moving. Wayne Simmons is one. Although he didn't like being he came out and said, I hated being traded at the deadline. It was awful.
He doesn't get a choice. So.
That might deter some teams though. But at the same time, maybe a team like the Islanders, maybe it's not so much of it's not so hard to move from Jersey to the island, Also, we talked a lot about Detroit. We never mentioned Mike Green. I do think that Mike Green is a guy who will probably be moved now.
Yeah, they won't get what they're hoping out of him in terms of return, but I think they'll still move him.
Well, and Detroit's probably going to have to eat half of his salary in order to make it happen. But he would be a guy to bring in, put on your second power play unit, play on your fourth, fifth, sixth defenseman.
And for a third round pick, it wouldn't be bad for a team to kick the tires on.
Yeah. It'll be interesting to see what happens.
I'm excited. Yeah.
Just a couple weeks. We will obviously stay abreast to all the rumors. One other thing. There is a possibility, I think, that Arizona trades Taylor Hall.
I absolutely agree. Yeah.
And that would be probably the weirdest thing that's ever happened at the trade deadline.
A superstar getting moved a couple times.
He gets moved twice.
Yeah.
Like he's gone in there and he just has not looked good. And maybe that's just the Arizona curse. You can't be a good player and go play there. Like Kessel hasn't even looked good either.
No, he hasn't either.
Just trade them both. Yeah. Trade both Kessel and Hall at the deadline. Just trade them both
to the same
Calgary.
team.
Hall's going to go sign in Calgary anyways. It's John Tavares all over again.
Oh my God.
He'll sign in Calgary.
You think so?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm fairly certain that in the offseason, no matter what, he'll just go sign with Calgary.
Wow.
Yeah.
All right.
Well, that's our show. You can find us on Twitter at OT Hockey Talk. Let us know what you thought, and we will continue talking hockey with you very soon.